What's going on, guys? Zuko back with another Last Epoch video. Hope you're all doing really well. I'm very excited about this one. This is my Enhancement Shaman Storm Slammer build. I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to call it yet, but the idea with this build, what I really wanted to do, if you know me from most of my content on the channel is World of Warcraft related. I like to play Shaman, and in Last Epoch, there is a mastery for Shaman right here, and I was trying to make a build that sort of captured the essence of what it's like to play Shaman in World of Warcraft, at least certain versions of it. So this is one of the first build that I've kind of come up with for Shaman. I'm really excited about it, and it focuses entirely on Earthquake. We're going to talk about it in a second, but what you're primarily doing is zapping your enemies with a lot of lightning damage, you're shocking enemies, and you're blowing enemies up with Earthquake. We have our Storm Totem, which is going to do lightning damage to enemies. We have our Crows, which are flying around, giving us buffs. And then we have Earthquake, which is slamming the ground, creating this zone of lightning on the ground afterwards to shock enemies. And it does an enormous amount of damage. This is a really fun build. It is, again, a melee Shaman build, which is basically what all my builds end up being. Let me show you how this thing works. We'll just jump. Let's go get that set item. We'll jump into an echo. I'll just show you how it works, and then I'm going to explain the build afterwards. What you're primarily doing is damage with Earthquake. You need to make sure that your totem is down at all times to give you the buffs that you're looking for. And then otherwise, you are just slamming enemies with Earthquake and doing lots of damage. That was a pretty big enemy there. But your totem and then your Storm Crows are all going to be buffing your spell damage. This is really important to understand. Earthquake, when you turn it into a lightning skill like this, it becomes, it scales off of spell damage now. It becomes a spell. It is not a melee attack anymore, and we do not scale any of our damage off of melee damage on our weapons, anything like that. It's all based on spell damage now. So that means you're going to have to, with your gear, you want to be hunting down items that buff your spell damage. That is the primary thing that you're looking at. It's also going to buff the damage of your totem, which is really good. And it will also buff the damage of Tempest Strike, which we are using as a filler spell. I'll talk about that in a second. The way that this build really works is when you get your totem down and your birds down, you're buffing all your spell damage, you end up cranking out an enormous amount. You can see this does, right now it does 82,000 damage. I'm only level 72 right now, okay? Like, we're just getting into the late game, so we're nowhere near optimized on this build. But you're just smashing the ground, doing an enormous amount of lightning damage, and again, you want to scale that with spell damage. I'll show you a really quick example of this. This staff doesn't look very good. I just actually picked it up because I got access to temple staffs now. It does a lot of spell damage. That means my Earthquake's doing 46.8 thousand. Look at this moon staff. 242% fizz damage and then lightning damage. It has melee and spell damage on it. It looks like a much better staff, but if we put it on, this goes from 46,000 to 43,000. So I really want to emphasize at the beginning of this video how much you have to invest into pure spell damage. That is what you're doing. You're like a spellcaster, but in melee. Now, another really cool part about turning Earthquake into a lightning ability, which is what Storm Rift does here, is that it also gives us a chance to stun now, okay? And we basically are going to scale a whole bunch of our stun chance so that when we encounter dangerous enemies, we can stun them, such as these mages right here. We're just going to permanently stun this guy once we get him out of his cage. So we smack him, and look, he can't even get his abilities off. I just keep stunning him over and over and over again. That's what you can do to really dangerous enemies who are going to pose a threat to you. You can actually just continuously stun them. And as a melee character, it is so important in terms of dealing with high health enemies and dangerous enemies. You want to just be able to stun them repeatedly so that they can't do any damage to you. We're never going to be, you know, one-shotting a mob off screen because we're not a ranged build. So you have to have another layer of defense essentially in your kit so that you can survive these really, really dangerous moments against characters like this. Hold on a second. Now we're going to build up some stacks with our Tempest Strike over here. Then we're going to stun these guys. Stun, stun. Build up some more Tempest Strike. What you're going to end up doing on boss fights and potentially into the late game on really, really difficult boss fights like Monolith boss fights is you want to actually build up your Tempest Strike on them. Tempest Strike has a node called Gladiator of Lagon, I believe. Yeah, right here. This is going to buff your spell damage, okay? So you can see it stacking up on the bottom here. You can see I've got 2 stacks, 4 stacks, 6 stacks in the bottom left here. This is building up my spell damage. I'm just going to show this off for a second. That increases the damage of my Earthquake. I put my totem down. Now, oh, it fell off. Hold on. Let's build it up again. Now it's doing 81,000. We can build it up again. It'll do even more once you get those stacks up. It's not going to show here because these mobs keep dying. But the point is, you can essentially build up this stack and make your Earthquake, there, 92,000. You can see we're getting close to 100k now. You can make your Earthquake do a crazy amount of damage while you have this buff up, Gladiator of Lagon, right here. So, again, your Tempest Strike, your Crows, and your Totem are all giving you spell damage. They're all buffing your spell damage, giving you more damage on Earthquake, which now scales with spell damage instead of melee damage. So, that's how the build works offensively. In terms of your defense, you're basically looking at aspect of the boar from the Beastmaster tree. It is a little bit unfortunate that we don't have more damage reduction just in the Shaman tree, but I think of the 3 Primalist specs, it probably has the weakest defense, okay? There's the least number of defensive nodes in this tree. You do get a little bit from, like, Silent Protector, where you get more armor when your totem is down, and then passively, if you look in the bottom left of your screen here, when you have a totem down, you get 50% to elemental resistances. This is actually really, really good, and it means that you actually don't have to invest quite as hard, into your elemental resistances. If you look at this, when I put my totem down, all my ele resists get up to a respectable number. My fire resistance is still terrible because I'm working on the build, but the point is, when your totem is down, you get armor. I go up to 35% armor, I get ele resist, and it buffs my spell damage. It does everything for me. So this build really requires that you have Storm Totem down. You're really not relying on Storm Totem to do a ton of damage. What you're hoping from Storm Totem and from Crows and from Tempest Strike is that they're going to shock enemies, so that when you hit them with Earthquake, they have 10 stacks of shock on them, and they're taking 50% more lightning damage, and they have a higher chance to stun. So we've invested in things like Static Field to make it so that we're shocking more with our totem. And then we're buffing our damage. You deal increased lightning damage if your Storm Totem has hit a shocked enemy recently. So again, we're like doubling down on our extra damage on Earthquake because our totem will shock, our Storm Crows are going to shock, our Tempest Strike will shock. So it means that you're definitely going to be, whenever this hits an enemy, they're going to be shocked. Then that's going to buff your flat lightning damage as well, or your percent lightning damage there as well. So that's how the build kind of all works together. Even your Fury Leap gives you flat global spell damage. So if we look at our Earthquake damage, 46k, it goes up to 58k just from leaping. Then you put the totem down and leap, it's up to 82k, start slamming, then our birds are buffing us. So it all kind of works together to keep this damage relevant. Now, again, defensively, I just want to touch on this again really quick. We do have to go into the Beastmaster tree and get aspect of the boar, okay, which gives us 30% damage reduction, and then Ursine's Strength gives us 16% damage reduction as well. That's 46 put together, which is huge. So you're almost at 50% DR. The only other thing for Shaman that gives you damage reduction is Conflux. It increases your area on your area skills, which is going to be very, very good for us, and less damage taken from shocked enemies. So we're, again, shocking all the time. So we're going to have 8% DR from this as well. 46 plus 8 is 54% DR in total. Now, it is a little frustrating that we do have to put 20 points into Beastmaster to make this work, but there's just no other damage reduction on the Shaman tree that is equal to the task. There's some more resistances here from Protective Circle, but that's just not enough. You need flat DR, and that's what this gives you, this aspect of the boar. So Druid gets a lot more tankiness when they're transformed. It's like not really fair, sort of, to the other specs, but Shaman, I think, is really designed to be the least tanky of the 3, so you have to sort of spec a little bit into Beastmaster to fix that problem. Not a big deal. The other way that we... The other defensive component that we have, of course, as I said before, is our stun chance. You can see there's just so many nodes that buffs stunning, and we're going down here and getting this one, and we've got this one up here. You have 75% increased stun chance. I have additional 40%. I'm actually going to put another point into this. 80% increased stun chance, and then I have other stun chance just flat on my gear that's buffing it. That's a really good defensive tool for melee characters. Super, super important. The last thing, of course, once the totem goes down, all of our defenses go up again. We get armor and resistances, so that's very, very, very good. One major thing that you need to make this build work is mana. You're going to see that this costs an enormous amount of mana. Look at my mana bar. So you can get quite a few Earthquakes out before you run out of mana. Maybe like 10 or 12 or something. So you can't just spam it indefinitely. I do have a pretty good amount of mana regeneration in my kit right now. And then I'm stacking Attunement, because Attunement does buff the damage of Earthquake substantially. It also buffs the damage of your totem substantially. So it's really good for this build just in general, and it gives you maximum mana. Every point of Attunement gives you maximum mana. So very, very important to just grab as much Attunement on your gear as you can. I think I have 12 on my chest, and I have it in a bunch of other spots. 7 on my gloves, 4 on my boots. You know, I just try to get it wherever I can. Strength is good too. Strength will scale the damage of Earthquake. You can see down here we have some strength scaling there. It doesn't scale the damage of your Storm Totem at all. So Attunement really is the best stat that you can hope to look for, and that's going to also give you that maximum mana, which gives you a little bit more room to work with, so you can spend, you know, as many of these as you want. I forgot to mention that Storm Totem also gives us a bunch of attack speed and cast speed. So when we put our totem down, we have crazy amounts of attack and cast speed. So very, very important that you have this sucker down, then you just start slamming away. If you do need to regenerate some mana, you flip into Tempest Strike, which is very, very quick when the totem is down. You're going to generate a bunch of mana from Tempest Strike, and you're also going to get those Gladiator of Lagon stacks, which is very, very good. Now, the passive tree. I want to talk about some important nodes to scale your damage into the end game, okay? If we just type spell into this tree, you can see that I really haven't even begun to invest points into all the spell damage nodes that I could in order to scale my damage into the late game. I had to take a really big detour on Beastmaster to get the defense on, but you know, here we're going to get 10 flat spell lightning damage, which is absolutely enormous. I can't tell you how much that is. It's actually a crazy amount of damage. We're going to continue to put more flat spell damage into Rune of Awe. We can get a chance to proc a Stormbolt here, which is not as important. We don't really have to do this till maybe later. Then the final node, you deal percentage increased spell damage for each active totem. Right now, we only have the one totem, but we could potentially change that in the future. I'm not entirely sure what I want to do about that. We'll see. This might change in the future, but you can put this down. You're going to get 24% more spell damage by just having one totem down. So ideally, you're probably going to want to get even more than one totem down. I believe there's a legendary that actually, or a unique item that says when you cast Storm Totem, you cast a bunch of other totems as well. That could be potentially a crazy way to scale your damage, where you're just taking Ascendant Circle and it's really buffing the rest of your damage. So there's a long way to go here. There's plenty of points that I have left to put in. I'm only level 72, as I said. We can scale this into the end game for sure. Conflux is the other really, really important one that I mentioned earlier. The damage reduction and the area, the increased area for Earthquake, so that you're slamming more enemies at once, which is really good. And then, of course, end game gear is what you're going to want to scale into. I have stuff that I can't even use yet, like these bladed staffs, that I can just scale my spell damage on, or more temple staffs, which just have flat spell damage, mana regen, minus to mana cost is really good, and then I can just scale my spell damage as much as possible. So the gear is completely unoptimized. We're not even there yet. The final step you might want to take is something like this. I just found this actually in an Echo a second ago. +3 to Earthquake. Adding points to Earthquake is a really good idea, because there's lots of flat damage we can get in the Earthquake tree. Concussion gives you flat damage. Rupture gives you flat damage. We can reduce the mana cost even more. You can make it so that nobody can dodge your Earthquakes anymore. There's a lot you can do with those extra 3 points into Earthquake. So again, this would be like an end game piece that I'm searching for, that I could eventually slam into a unique to make a really crazy legendary. Speaking of uniques, there are some really cool options. If we look at Stormcarved Testament, this is probably the best relic you could hope to get, and it's something you should definitely look for. It is a physical resistance relic, and then it gives you 6 spell damage for you and your totems, which again, flat spell damage is nuts. 12% lightning penetration, which is very, very good. Shock chance is good because that gives you more lightning pen, more chance to stun. Lightning resistance is good. Mana is good because it gives you more wiggle room to cast more earthquakes before you run out of mana. And then you have a 12% chance to summon a storm totem on hit, and you get 6 attunement. I mean, this is just like far and away the best relic you could hope to hunt down. It tells you right here you can go fight Lagon, the god of storms. I'm actually in that monolith literally right now, so this is where I'm going to be farming that item from. That's a good late game piece for you to find. Probably the best relic in the game for this build. Then there's Stormbreaker. This is not necessarily as good. It's just an interesting idea. You get a whole bunch of leech from lightning damage that you deal. Again, you get flat mana. And you have a 36% chance to cast Lightning Strike when you use a skill that costs at least 10 mana. This thing, Earthquake, costs way more than 10 mana. So I'm not sure. It also says Stormbolt here rather than Lightning Strike, so I'm not sure how good this would be. I don't think it's actually very good at all because it has melee damage and then flat melee damage again. Not really designed quite for this build. If you were doing a build that focused a lot more on Tempest Strike being your main attack, then you would definitely want Stormbreaker as your final piece there. And then finally, there's Velatria's Storm Crown. This looks really good. You get spell damage. You get armor +1 to the level of lightning spell skills. We have turned Earthquake into a spell, so that counts for this crown here. Lightning penetration, once again, huge for fighting bosses. Intelligence is kind of whatever. That just gives you ward retention. And then 1% shock chance per intelligence. Again, if you had some intelligence to scale, you could. We already have plenty of ways to apply shock, so this part is not as important. But just as a baseline helmet, getting spell damage and then +1 to all skills might be good, but again, not necessarily the best. Just an idea to potentially look at. The lightning penetration, again, is also very, very good for extra damage. So those are some items to kind of look at. I think in particular, the Stormcarved Testament is the absolute best one to get. And then you could probably just scale the rest of your damage by getting uniques and smashing them together with something like a Tusk Great Helm to get the +3 to Earthquake to head over there. So that's the build in a nutshell, guys. It's a lot of slamming. It's very, very simple. You put your totem down and you slam enemies. I'm going to work on making this build a late game monster. We're going to try and scale into the late game. Again, I'm only level 72. We are just starting to progress through the monolith system. I haven't made a single legendary item. I still have some yellow items that are just, you know, not really that great. My relic is kind of garbage. There's a lot of room to grow in this build. If you want to try something like this, I would highly recommend it. It's a lot of fun, and I had a really fun time building it. I will, again, continue to work on it. If you want me to try and post the entire build on a website, I'm going to work towards doing that for all of my builds. I think I had a couple people requesting the build on like one of the websites like Maxroll or something. I'm going to work on trying to do that right now. I've just been really busy, but I will definitely try and do that for you guys. And yeah, that's in a nutshell. So if you want to try this build, let me know in the comments down below what you think about it. Let me know if there's any way you think you could improve it. Again, I'm just starting to get into the end game of it, and I'm trying to piece it together. There's probably something that I'm missing that I could be adding into this build that might be really good. Let me know what you think in those comments down below. I would love to hear from you. If you want to join the Discord, there's a link for it down below as well. Thank you so much again for watching. Love you guys. I will see you in the next one.